Well, if you're going to get a divorce and you have a kid, get the kid into therapy.
Mm.
The child may be fine. The child may look perfectly normal. He's processing it because half his friends come from broken homes. Remember the old phrase, broken homes? They don't say that anymore. But
No.
still, half his friends may come from one-parent families. Doesn't matter. Get the kid into therapy because he's going to be affected at some level.
Welcome to Imperfect Momming. Our children are constantly looking to us for examples. The term role model doesn't quite cut it here. We are shaping their worldview with every move we make. You see, it's not in the lectures we give or moments where we're actively attempting to teach them. It's in the micro movements we make, the unconscious ways in which we navigate life. We are constantly teaching our children how to show up for themselves, their friends, their future partners, and even their future children. So what can we do to ensure we are raising thoughtful, compassionate, self-aware human beings? We have to become them ourselves. No one is perfect, but we can all still be better, and it starts with self-healing. Let's get to it.
Welcome back to Imperfect Momming Podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Lyons, and we have a very special guest today, Anthony Mohr. Welcome to the podcast.
Alicia, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, I was a Superior Court judge for 27 years, and I still sit part-time. I'm retired, but I'd say maybe a week, a month or so I sit. And I've handled assignments in civil matters, criminal matters, mental health matters. And besides that, when I retired, I became a fellow at Harvard at the Advanced Leadership Initiative, and that was in 2021. And so I did that for a year and had a great time. The program exposes you to all of the schools, and you have meetings with professors all over the place and talk about various projects you might want to pursue. I ended up writing for their review, the Advanced Leadership Initiative Social Impact Review, and I'm now their senior managing editor, which I enjoy it. So I've been sourcing articles, interviewing people, writing a couple of op-eds here and there. And then in my free time, go to the gym, see my friends, sleep late, travel.
Living the retired life.
Living the dream.
Not 100%.
Right. And I wrote a book, which is called Every Other Weekend, Coming of Age with Two Different Dads. It's a memoir of what it was like from age 9 when my parents got a divorce all the way through high school, because my parents remarried when I was 11. And so every second weekend I was with one family or the other. And the two fathers were extremely opposite characters, very, very opposite. One was a well-known actor, kind of lived life large, enjoyed himself. The other was a very hard-bitten businessman, workaholic, conservative. My own father was a big liberal, worked with Bobby Kennedy, was a big Stevenson supporter back in the day. Stan, my stepdad, helped Gerald Ford get going with his career in Michigan. And then when they moved to California, he was close to Richard Nixon because his insurance broker was Nixon's broker. So they got to know each other. So they were quite opposite in many ways.
Sounds like it. So I'm assuming that two very different men shaped you in two very different ways.
You got it. You got it. And the unsung hero of the book was my mother. It's funny, when I started to write the book, I didn't think she would come into it very much, but she did. She just kept showing up on the page, whether I liked it or not. And what I realized was she was running interference for me. When Stan wanted me to work hard and not have a lot of fun, she would say, hey, wait a minute. He's enjoying high school. He's enjoying his friends. He's on the debate team writing for the paper. Let him be. And when my father was getting me involved with all of his extramarital affairs, she basically jumped in and said, look, you can do anything you want, just don't involve my son in all of your little dalliances. So she was the unsung hero of the book.
I had a similar experience. I was a lot younger when my parents got divorced, and And we had, every weekend with dad and every weekday with mom. And then in the summertime we switched. And, but yeah, two very different dads, two very different moms.
Sure.
And I think that that's a pretty common situation that kids are growing up with.
It is now. It is now. Back in the late 50s, when it happened to me, it wasn't that common.
No.
And, again, the two households were very different cultures. It was like spending one weekend in Spain and the next weekend in Japan. They were just absolutely different in terms of customs and expectations and the way they handled matters. But back then, there weren't that many divorces. And divorce was frowned upon back then.
How did that affect you as a kid growing up?
Interesting. I was never teased or ostracized because of the divorce, at least to my knowledge. So that was fortunate. And even when I got into middle school and high school, nobody really refused to be my friend. No girl refused to go out with me, as far as I know, because of my family situation. But it was traumatizing. Suddenly your father's not there anymore and your mother's not happy. And my mother really wasn't happy. She was scared. She was alone. And believe it or not, my father's mother was living in the house and wouldn't leave. So here she is with the mother of the man who had left my mother for another woman.
Wow. Talk about family dynamics.
Yep.
Awkward.
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, interesting. And I do remember it was normal for me growing up because I was a year old when my parents split up, but it affected my older brothers a lot more, the oldest specifically, more than me. And I do remember in elementary school that one of my teachers pulled me aside and said, so-and-so's parents are getting divorced and maybe you can, support her through that emotionally.
Wow.
And it was like, and that wouldn't happen today. Like it's just so much more prevalent now.
Marriage is like going steady in high school today.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting. What was your goal for the book?
The goal was really to tell the story. I wasn't sitting here saying, okay, I want to teach people something. I figured if that happens, it'll happen. But I had been urged by many people to tell my story, if you will, starting when I was a lawyer. And I was too busy being a lawyer. And then when I became a judge, some friends of the family who were literary agents kept saying, you've got to tell your story. And I said, I'm too busy being a judge. I don't want to do that. But I always liked to write. I had written for my school paper, high school, college, law school. And so I found myself moving in that direction. And I figured, okay, I wrote a couple of personal essays here and there. One or two of them got published. And then I decided when COVID hit, let's see if I can string these together and turn it into a real memoir. And again, I wasn't trying to, teach or be instructive or pedantic or anything like that. I just wanted to tell a story. And if I could, interest people in that, that would be nice. And if somebody could learn something, so much the better.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've heard that like less than 1% of the people that actually want to write a book ever do.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a very small percentage of people that want to that actually do. And my dad passed away in 2022.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And and one of the last text conversation that we had, I asked him, did you ever want to write a book? Because he had a colleague that wrote multiple books. And he said, yeah, but just everything else always, was more important, or there were more important things or something along those lines. And I said, such is life. And he said, yep. And that was our last text conversation, which I thought was kind of a funny thing. So he was a pastor, and I have all of his sermons. And so I'm going to go through all of his 30 years of sermons and 40 years of sermons and create a book for him.
That would be great. And, people do that. I have a cousin who's a very, very successful guy back east. he's a beer distributor, but one of the biggest in New York.
Mhm.
And Simon actually wrote a memoir about his life. Now, he knew he wasn't literary. His prose is very straightforward, not lyrical at all. But he wanted to tell his story, so he did. And he got one of these private publishers to put it out. I received it about 2 weeks ago, and I'm starting to read it. I think it's great.
Mhm.
I think it's great. And he's actually got more of a compelling story than I do, because he was born in a displaced persons camp in Europe after the war. And, he had family in Auschwitz, lost
Mhm.
people there. And you ought to have him on the air. And the guy he's amazing. He's just amazing.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying his book, no end.
Very
But he
cool.
did it. Alicia, he wrote the book. And you're right, most people don't.
Yeah.
One of my friends put it this way. He said he had a friend who's a dentist. The dentist kept saying, someday I'm going to write a book. When I retire, I'm going to write a book. And the patient, who was an author, said, when I retire, I'm going to be a dentist. But I won't know what I'm doing because I haven't really trained. I haven't really practiced. If you're going to write a book, start practicing now. Start training now.
Yeah.
Start writing now, because when you retire, it's going to be way too late.
Yeah. I had stopped writing. I've been writing since I could put 2 sentences together. And I stopped writing for a period of about 12 years. And I remember going to a conference and saying, kind of unconsciously saying, that I have books inside of me that are dying to come out.
Yeah.
And I started writing shortly after that. And so
Good.
I think 2 books since then that I've finished and are on the way to, one's published and the other one's on the way to being released. So
that's great news.
Yeah. So I got that whole practice thing.
All right. So you and
I
I
love
are,
that antidote, though.
you and I are among the 1%.
We are. I like being part of the special crowd. Are there any stories, or is there one interesting story from your book that you want to kind of share?
Well, yeah, there's an early story I wrote about. My father, as I mentioned, was an actor, and he always played the bad guy. He loved playing the villain. And of course, as a kid, this was a little bit disconcerting, because I was always watching my father get beaten up, get arrested, get killed, whatever it was. And, it's hard to kind of make the difference between real and fantasy. And I remember being in a theater one time, this huge theater called the Lorena Theater in Sherman Oaks. And I was watching a Western called The Duel at Silver Creek. My dad was a bad guy, shot people, even shot a woman in the movie, just very in cold blood, just killed her, shot her. And so at one point there's a pursuit, and my father's killed. And of course, when that happens, the whole theater erupted in applause. And I'm 5 years old. I'm sitting there going, oh my God, everybody's happy. My father died. And that was very upsetting.
Yeah. And I would imagine back then that there was no conversation about how this is fiction and not real, or was there?
My mother rode to the rescue. She said, look, it's only a movie. Your father's at home. No, don't worry about it. And then she said, we knew Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. And Jerry Lewis's kid would get very upset when people would laugh at Jerry Lewis. He was a comic, and people would start laughing hysterically. And he said, they're laughing at my father. And my mother said, no, they're not laughing at him. They're laughing with him.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, that's not part of my world, so it's not something that I would have even imagined, but that's very interesting. Is there a piece of advice that you want to share with moms listening?
Well, if you're going to get a divorce and you have a kid, get the kid into therapy. The child may be fine. The child may look perfectly normal. He's processing it because half his friends come from broken homes. remember the old phrase broken homes. They don't say that anymore, but
No.
still, half his friends may come from one parent families. Doesn't matter. Get the kid into therapy because it's going to be he's going to be affected at some level. And of course, when I was a child, you didn't see a psychologist. Anybody who did was considered crazy. I'm going to see a psychologist. You must be crazy. Well, not now. It's normal, but it's something that should be done. Yeah. If only because it's just, it's preventative, if you will. If nothing else, it's preventive medicine.
Absolutely. Just like exercising at the gym prevents you from hopefully having heart disease in the future or whatnot.
So true. Yeah. So true. So that would be the main piece of advice I'd give to any family who's going to contemplate a divorce and have a child.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very, I think that there's still a little bit of a stigma. I think post 2020, it became more evident that mental health is something that we need to be concerned about and really work on and focus on. So I'm glad that there's been that kind of shift, but I do remember it's kind of hush hush. You're going to a therapist and you don't talk to people.
There was a guy in my high school, very talented boy. Leland he was a great speaker. He was very good at writing. I think he wrote a couple of plays. He ended up going to Harvard, and but he had a lot of problems. I mean, he was, his junior year in high school, he was picked up in the men's room at Roxbury Park in Beverly Hills, with some guy, and this was clearly an issue, and he was being sent to a psychologist. And I remember him saying to me very matter-of-factly, I can't go to this thing. I have an appointment with my psychologist. And I'm thinking, my God, he's crazy. He must be crazy. He's seen a shrink. Well, no, he was progressive. His family was ahead of the time. Unfortunately, he died of AIDS, which was very sad. He was a very talented guy.
Yeah. Yeah, there's help out there, and not all of the help is psychiatrists. There's lots of really talented coaches out there too. Like little plug. But is there a book that's been instrumental in your personal development journey?
There have been a couple. My favorite author is John Steinbeck. And I would say his books have always been influential for me. I can't put my finger on one or the other. I loved Cannery Row, which I'm not quite sure why, but I loved it. Mac and the Boys was just wonderful characters. The Grapes of Wrath got to me. It really did. It was a study of people from Oklahoma trying to make do, get across the Route 66 at the time into California. And of course, at the end, the woman loses her baby, Rose of Sharon. But it was a very touching book, really touching. Another book, which was not by Steinbeck, Herman Wouk's Marjorie Morningstar, which really touched me again, because Marjorie Morningstar at the end was not who she was at the beginning. And Wally Ronkin, who always had a crush on her, was the one person who remembered her back when. In her salad days. And he says that in the last couple of pages. I'm the only one who remembers Marjorie as she was before Marjorie Morningstar became Marjorie Morningstern.
Very cool. Where can our listeners find you and or your book?
Well, the book's available almost anywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, IndieBound, Thrift Books. You can just go online and get it. I do have a website, www.anthonyjmohr.com, and that'll lead you to the book as well as some other essays I've written, which are not in the book. And you can walk into a Barnes & Noble. If they don't have it on the shelves, they'll order it for you.
Awesome.
So it should be fairly easy to get.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate your time and for sharing your stories with me and our listeners. And I know that even though it wasn't the intention necessarily, I know that hearing some of your stories is going to be helpful to to children growing up in a two-father home, or even to maybe a dad's going to read it and listen to it, and learn something about something.
I've been told by people who have read it that they did learn something from it. I have had that conversation with people, and it's very uplifting. It's very encouraging when somebody says, boy, I read your book, and it was really helpful to me on my journey. That's what an author wants to hear. You're writing to get to people and affect them one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a quick aside, I wrote a short story called Crescent Drive, and I'm remembering it now. I wrote it 10 years ago, but it deals with a fire. And I won't tell you the ending, but it's not a good ending.
Mm.
And one person I knew not well, excuse me, little laryngitis here. One person kept and said, I was so upset. How could you write that book? I'm so upset. I was in tears. You really made me angry, and you really made me upset. And I said, good. That's what an author wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
Want to get to the reader. I'm glad I got to you, and I'm glad you got upset.
Yeah.
That's what we want to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for your time, and we will have another episode of Imperfect Momming for you all coming next week. And until we meet again, keep healing.
Thank you for tuning in to Imperfect Momming. It's time for us to step up and realize that our power is not in trying to shape our children. Our power lies in shaping ourselves into the people we want our children to model themselves after. Don't just do it for your kids. Do it for yourself. When you become a more self-aware, compassionate, and confident person, you and everyone around you benefit. For more information about me and my work, visit AliciaLyons.com. That's ALYSIALYONS.com. And until we meet again, keep healing.